All right, over to you, Michael.
All right, so back again, everyone, with the forecast contest. We're going to start off, as we often do, with the latest verification. Latest verification for the period July 8th to July 12th was 68.8 CDDs. Looking at the verifications, CFS, as per the usual, is our worst contender. The only score that was negative this week. But as for everyone else, they did reasonably well. Uh, I was up there, Maxar, Dave, Sean, all in the top four for human forecasters, and then the EC rounds up the top five. Take a look at the. Oh, I had this built before. Take a look at the. I don't know what happens to this anymore. Values. Okay. Oh, and I've got the wrong dates. Hold on. I put this up before, so I didn't have to do it when we started the meeting, and I guess it decided to go away. So you can see from the CDD departure map, pretty warm across the northeast and the southwest, adding to that CDD total, which I believe is a record for this time period. A little bit of cool in the northwest. I don't know if anyone had that in their forecast, but can talk about that if you did. I'm pretty sure I didn't. So,
Michael, you can click the WDD tab and that'll show you the
okay, yeah.
rankings there.
Um,
And then just click over to the pop CDD and the weighting scheme a little bit above, a little bit above, a little bit. Yeah,
oh,
right. Yeah, there you go. Boom.
yeah. So if I'm reading this correctly, it looks like it was the warmest by about 2 CDDs. Yeah.
Yep.
So definitely a warm period. Um, so that brings up an interesting question, since it looks like we have a couple of industry folks on today. Um, what do you do in a forecast like this where you end up having um, record warmth? Like, because as I understand, I think you're not supposed to really forecast record warmth unless you've really, or record cold for that matter, unless you've really got something like a strong signal. And um, based on a lot of these forecasts, there wasn't really, that strong of a signal to go as high as 68 CDDs. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, I'd be interested to hear on that. And just
Yeah, no, I mean you're right there. It's difficult to forecast a record, especially when you're looking at 16 to 20 days out. There's just so much that can go wrong. Um, a lot of times when we're doing forecasts at that lead time, the goal is not always to get the exact number right, but to get it directionally right, get the pattern right. Um, and a lot of things go into how anomalous you want to go. That includes the models, and just what signals are out there. But yeah, it would be tough to make a record forecast of 16 to 20 days out. But I know with yours and ours, and we were still going pretty high levels there. I mean, if you just jump back to Dynacast to see what the WDD data was for that.
this
It looks like several of us were well in the top 10 with our forecast. So, and that's reasonable. The 10-year normal itself is just outside of the top 10. So there's reasons to be, within a top 10 level, which is still a decent forecast if you do end up getting a record, especially for that lead time.
Yeah, and Michael, I would add too, like, I would probably, I think I know what you mean, but I would probably phrase what you said a little slightly different. It's not that you don't want to forecast a record. if you know a record's coming, of course you want to forecast a record. I mean, that's absolutely what you want to do. I think historically it's thought that it's difficult, it's challenging. Maybe there's not skill at 15, 20 days out at forecasting a record. So I think that's always been the challenge. Can you forecast if they're, for those instances? Obviously records don't happen too often. They happen maybe more in the summer with heat than they used to, of course, but still it's a record event, so it doesn't happen too often. So can you forecast those relatively infrequent events at relatively long lead times with skill? And that's always a challenge. But I agree with what Bradley said. When you look at some of those forecasts, at least for this period, including Maxar's, they were the verification, and yours, Michael, 2 or 3 CDDs off, and benchmarking that to the 10-year, the 30-year, even what was the EC, 62. So those are a lot of traditional benchmarks that industry looks at, 30-year, 10-year EC, and you and industry and some other folks, perform better. So at least in this forecast, it seems like there was, some useful skill.
Yeah, well, thanks. That makes sense. All right. So if no one has anything else to add, I think that's really that's a really helpful answer for me. Anyway, just gonna move to this one. Just gonna move to the 500 millibar pattern here. Looks like nothing. Well, I don't remember what it looked like last week, but looks like a big ridge over the northeast, and as well as over the southwest. That might be that ridge that was starting to build into the central U.S. around, I guess, around now, with a pretty large trough off the west coast, Canada. So that doesn't look like there's any surprises in here as to the departures, except for maybe it looks like in the southeast there was a little bit of a trough going on that might be what was it, Faye? Is that what the tropical storm was the other day? Which is interesting that with this trough here, that even with that, where I'm sure there was rain there, we still wound up. Let's go back. Yeah, we still wound up negative or over above average. That's the word. In cooling degree days in the southeast. So really, could have been a lot warmer, I think, had there not been a trough in this higher demand area. And now, last but not least, for let's this one. Yeah, okay. Let's see what date this one. June 23rd. I want to take a look at the Maxar forecast from that day, just to see. So, other than it looks like, I should go back and compare it. But from eyeballing it, it looks like the only place Maxar's forecast was really close to being off was Florida. Yeah. Oops. This one. Yeah, so looks like the only place that we're off was Florida, and that's only like a really small chunk of Florida. And so, I mean, this to me looks like pretty much I'd say about as good as you can get for a 20-day forecast. So, EC looks about right as well, spatially speaking. A little cold in the northwest, warmth across most of the northeast and central. CFS, not too sure if I can make anything out of this, but at the very least, it does have the cool in the northwest, but it seems to be missing a lot of the southern and southwest heat. So, anyone have any thoughts about this period?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at our forecast now, and looks like we based our forecast on analogs for the MJO, expected phase 1 and 2. That happened. What we like to do is look at analogs. So we do some filtered analogs. So we're looking at, say, like, how has the MJO in these phases, what kind of pattern have they produced given some other factor? So that other factor that we've been looking at more closely are the anomalously warm waters in the Indian Ocean. Obviously, that's where the signal has been it's almost a standing wave since the start of summer, and that continues. I can actually, if you don't mind, I'll share my screen just to show you what our analog composites look like that we were using as another piece of guidance when we were making that forecast. Let me see. Do that here. All right, so you see my screen. Those are the first map is the MJO in phase 1, and then the other one is in phase 2. And if you look at the verifications, you see a lot of similarities just spatially with that pattern coming from those phases. We also made some considerations to the negative GLAM. In summertime, that has been a warm influence, especially over the past couple of years. So that gives us a little bit more confidence to take it additionally hotter than maybe what these analog composites look like. So those were the basis of where our forecast was for the period, and at least spatially and most of the details, with the exception of Florida, where we were too cool, worked out pretty well in this case.
Hey, Bradley, since we're talking in a little bit about forecast tools, and Michael brought up the CFS once or twice. Serious question here. Obviously, the CFS, at least according to our performance metrics, has not performed well this summer, well below the 30-year, according to some of our metrics. I guess my question for you is, have you found it useful at all? And if so, how? And I guess, for an example, if I asked you, if you, for the last 3 months, if you could not have, if you were not aware of the CFS guidance, if you just did not have it at your availability, do you think your performance would be, would you have lost value? Would your performance not been as good without the, being able to utilize the CFS guidance?
Yeah, I don't think it would have made too big of a difference in our performance. What we've been using it for lately, because it does not handle the temperature parameter very well. Obviously, this actual case was pretty decent spatially to what happened. Obviously, not warm enough and pretty much all the details, but spatially it did fairly well. We like to look at some of the MJO parameters from that model, just sort of as confirmation that the other models that we're looking at, that's showing some consistency in that regard. So in that respect, we do use it. We look at it every day. But as far as looking at the temperatures on it and saying, okay, we need to do this with our forecast because of the model, we haven't been able to use it like that because of its lower skill.
Okay, so and I think I've heard this from some of our other folks too, there may be some value, maybe not so much in the 2-meter temperature parameter, but in, some of the tropical forcing parameters, maybe the 500 millibar heights, there's still some value there, potentially. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right. Any other thoughts, comments, complaints, or concerns before we move on to the current forecast? 14th. All right. So taking a quick look at the numbers, looks like most of us are pretty close together, except for Jack Stone, who appears to be quite high. Um, CFS continues to be the coolest forecast. Based on where we all are, I hope that continues to be incorrect. So start off here. I'll start us off just as a reminder. I have the wrong spread. I should say 8. I'll fix that. Just as a reminder, though, for some of us, myself included, we're doing the we're kind of making this like we're on call with clients, and we're the forecaster, and you can ask us jerky questions, as Dave always likes to put it. So feel free to ask jerky questions. Now I will do my forecast. So my forecast was for 69.1 CDDs with a spread of 8 CDDs. Average confidence, this should say 8, as I mentioned earlier. So going in, I started out with a base value of 63.43, and that's based off of my 10-year and euro blend. I then took a look at the teleconnections. Went with a negative NAO signal. Also a negative AO signal, but I didn't factor this too heavily into my forecast, since the AO's influence in mid-July is and August is kind of small. And went also with a positive to maybe neutral PNA. But I just kind of went with a status quo of what the pattern has been for the past week or two or so, with the positive PNA, negative NAO pattern going on. Also took a look at the CPC forecast. Still shows a lot of warmth, 70% chance above warmth through most of the south, and I think pretty good chance, 60% over the rest of the country, with only a 55% chance in the north central. And they mentioned in their discussion, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but they seemed a little bit less confident in the warmth in the north central region. So I went a little bit lower on my values, on increasing my values forecast. So overall, wait, I forgot one thing. EPO I also took a look at. Didn't really get a strong signal out of it, and especially at 14-day lead time, it's kind of hard to, based on this versus the analysis, kind of hard to get a clear signal out of the EPO, at least right now. So I didn't it didn't factor into my final value. So increased this number 63.43 by 3.2 based on the negative NAO and positive PNA regime, and another 2.5 based on the CPC forecast, coming to my final value of 69.1. So that's my forecast. Any comments, complaints, questions, concerns?
Yeah, I guess I have 2 questions with my I guess industry hat on. And that, Bradley, as Michael said, we try to do role reversal here. I guess 2 thoughts come to mind, and these are not necessarily easy questions, Michael. But when you were talking, one of the things that went through my head is, you're talking about a lot of teleconnections, but why? In other words, what I feel like what I really want to know is what's driving the current pattern, and whatever it is it going to persist? So if you tell me that the NAO, this negative NAO, like you brought up NAO at one point, NAO has been a driver for this heat, then I think it's relevant. But if you're just telling me, hey, the PNO is slightly positive, why are you telling me what? Like, I want to know why you're telling me. So I think, it could be interesting to try to just as you think about your, as you're providing your briefing to your clients, in this case it's us, tell us what's been going on and what's going to happen, because that's ultimately, I think, what we want to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So.
Not an easy question, I know, but
Yeah. So the reason I mentioned the P&A is based on my formula. The teleconnections are since this is mainly what I look at. Teleconnections is to me what drives the pattern, and the negative NAO has been pretty consistent since what is this, latter half of June. So around June 20th, it's been pretty consistently negative, and the P&A has been more or less on the slightly positive side. So for the past, I guess, what would be three-ish weeks now, maybe three and a half weeks. We've been in a fairly consistent teleconnection pattern with the slightly positive P&A and the negative NAO. So to me, that means that since it appears to be continuing, that the current pattern we're in should persist. Doesn't guarantee it's going to persist, but based on my formula, the pattern should continue to persist to be warm. As for what was the second question again? Sorry.
just what's been driving the pattern, and will it persist?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think that answers. And there's also, I think this. I'm not entirely sure. Not 100%, but I think the negative NAO, positive P&A did have a part to play in the current ridge that's in, I think, the central U.S. right now, giving them their warm and muggy conditions. I think for the next few days at least. So usually when you get a ridge in the summer it's kind of hard to displace it if it gets set up, and I think it's set up, but I'd have to double check that for you.
Okay. Thank you.
I can jump in on that question too. So there's a question here on whether you can say the P&A is driving the forecast as opposed to being driving the pattern as opposed to being a representation of the pattern, right? So, and I think that's where the question is coming from. There's a lot of things that can drive the pattern to look like it is, and then there are patterns that can set up, and you can have those drivers changing, but you can still hold on to that pattern. You can still have that persistence. So there's there's that debate on, is it a driver or is it just a representation? So most of those teleconnections that you mentioned, the EPO, PNA, NAO, I like to think of those more as representations of the pattern more than the drivers of the pattern. And I think in this case, when we're looking at the forecast, and you may have a good forecast and that you are looking at a persistence pattern, because the drivers that have led to that pattern really haven't changed, whether you're looking at your oceanic indices, your sea surface temperatures, or even factors like the negative GLAM, atmospheric background state, which looks to continue, or the MJO, which has been a standing wave and not really moving a whole lot. Those all expected to remain the same. Pattern persistence might end up being the better answer for this particular case upcoming.
Bradley, staying on this topic a little bit, or a related topic. I know one of the things that has come up is about the persistence of this pattern. Like I was looking at your forecast the other day. I don't think it's changed too much. I think for the June-July period, you had this as if not the hottest, one of the hottest June, Julys on record or on target. And so inevitably it comes up, how long is it going to, well, a couple questions. Is it, what's driving, of course, what we just talked about, but, how much persistence should be a factor in your forecast, and how do you factor it into your forecast? Especially when you're making these medium range forecasts. Can you, and I don't know, there's different views on this, but can you talk about that a little bit in terms of what, it's been so hot, it looks so hot. Does that persistence in itself, does that factor in to your thinking going ahead? Or do you just try to put that outside and just say, hey, let me just look at this, all the different forecast indicators and pretend I don't know that we're on target for a record, warm June, July period?
Sure. So it's really both, right? Because we can look at analogs of those different indices and see how they have what they've produced in the past. But this year is also a new year that you're not necessarily using this year as analogs within your historical analog sets, right? So it's important to see how this particular year is also responding. But there's a seasonality to it as well. So, for example, if we're looking at a several-week forecast out, this time of year, there's other things that can pop up that can change the pattern that may not be as easy as saying, hey, the MJO is going to start moving. We're getting into a time of year where tropical activity it increases globally, right? So not just talking the Atlantic Basin, but the Western Pacific as well. So those are things that we have to keep in mind too, as just far as, hey, do we want to go with a record hot forecast right now? Well, hey, there's a lot of these unknown factors that come into play more so as we go further in time now, that maybe we want to at least have some consideration too within our forecast that, hey, maybe the pattern could change. So maybe we keep the same pattern because the indices point to that, but over time become less anomalous because there are things out there that could change things that just we can't see at this moment.
Great, thank you. And just a quick housekeeping note, two things. Jack Stone, I know that number is a little high. This is first time submitting a forecast. They're a new group from University of Delaware. So I think they're just getting calibrated. So they may actually tweak that number. They put in that number before they had all the data. And Michael, if you do a refresh, I think Philip added his forecast here.
Yeah, I noticed he got online, so figured he'd be showing up soon on here. So if there's anyone have any more questions for in general, I guess, or me, my forecast. Okay. So speaking of Phil, how about you want to go next?
Sure. All right. So my formula, the only thing I tweaked from my formula was I switched the 20-year running mean to a 15-year running mean given its better performance recently. Other than that, everything else is the same. We have tropical convection scattered over a broad region from Africa to Indonesia. So that's an MJO at a rather uncertain phase 2, given the broad area of convection. It's a little hard to parse out the signal. Also convenient that the models disagree on the evolution of the MJO. Some keep it in phase 2 of reopening and some actually shut it down into the null phase. But we see that using the lag composites along with our MJO analog, everything seems to suggest that the MJO is still a warm signal. So I kept that as a warm signal. We have the CPC showing warmth in the CONUS and Alaska. Now the highest probabilities of warmth are in the southeast and desert southwest, a little different from what it looked like last week. And they mentioned the MJO being a minor influence in their forecast. This was treated as an extremely warm signal. Teleconnections was mentioned earlier. Looking at it, I generally agree with what Mike said, with the NAO looking to be slightly negative and the PNA slightly positive. So I treated that as a somewhat warm signal. And then finally coming to the models, we have the EC and the CFS both showing a lack of a trough, but the EC having that ridge centered in the western half of the CONUS, while the CFS keeps that ridge over the northern CONUS instead. But putting everything together, it looks like the EC is very warm. The CFS, they've got their temperature issues, but I think their pattern with a general broad ridge over the US is probably not too far off. And everything added together, I get a value of 63.34 for CDDs. I added a fudge factor of 3 for pattern continuity, and along with an abundance of warm variables and the potential that they're all underdone. Confidence was also above average, with lack of tropical cyclone activity helping the confidence.
Okay. Any questions for Phil?
I guess Phil, and so how does that number, yes, that number. Um, well, I guess, and maybe not to beat a dead horse here, but you mentioned the teleconnections too. Can you share your view in terms of in the summer, um, Phil, how are you suggesting that the PNA and NAO, you use them um, as indicators as to driving the pattern? The PNA, i.e., if the PNA is positive, I think there's more risk that it's going to be warmer or colder or whatever. How do you use the teleconnections this time of year to influence your forecast?
I guess it sort of depends on what the situation is. Like right now, for example, we know that the MGO signal is not very strong. ENSO is also near neutral. And as the CPC also mentions, right now they don't see the MGO being a huge factor in the pattern. So with that, that seems to just suggest that the tropical forcing isn't quite there. And without the tropical forcing, then I look to the teleconnection forcing, which granted, it's also not all that strong, but I do know that there's a pretty strong correlation between negative NAO and warmth in the southeast in the summer. So that was part of my forecast process.
Let me ask you one more question too. And again, not necessarily an easy question, but just something to think about. Like if I said to you, "Hey, Philip, I'm in the money as long as this forecast doesn't go really cold. Like if it's slightly above, moderately above, whatever, I'm gonna do fine. I'm just worried about like a complete flip of the pattern." And if I said to you, "What things should I look for?" Even if that's a relatively low probability event, what do you think could be a driver if 3 weeks from now we're talking about a significant ridge trough pattern with relative cool anomalies across a lot of the eastern half of the country?
I guess only two things I could think of that might change things. One is if the precipitation ends up being much higher, especially in the central portion of the country, which you can see on the CPC, they're forecasting below normal precipitation. And the other thing is, right now, the tropical cyclone graphics on, like, say, JMA or on the NHC only go out to about 5 days. And for now, they don't expect any formation. But when we get to the 15-20-day period, if tropical cyclone activity suddenly starts ramping up and you get a bunch of these recurving storms, then I think that could spell trouble for our forecast.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any more questions for Phil? All right. So got about 23-ish minutes left. So unless somebody else wants to go, I can give the rest of the time to Bradley, unless he has an objection to it. Go over his forecast if he doesn't mind.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Do
Do
you want
you
the
have a
screen?
copy of it? I mean, if you can just throw out the forecast, that'll work fine for me too.
Is it you just want this one but for today?
No, that's the old one. Actually, if you want to just go into Dynacast
Okay.
and just click 16 to 20 day in Dynacast. If you go down there, yeah. So that's what our forecast is right now for the 16 to 20. So basically, we're looking at above normal temperatures across a good portion of the U.S. Some of the exceptions far northern tier in Canada, where we're closer to normal, and then also in the desert Southwest, where we're also closer to normal. This time of year, we pay a little bit closer attention to the Southwest. We're looking for monsoonal influences coming into play. So we do see that in the forecast, starting to increase later in the 6-10 day period and continuing through 11-15 day. And without much movement in the MJO, we continue to hold temperatures being closer to normal there, just in response to some monsoonal uncertainties. But the MJO is still the primary factor that's driving this forecast. Standing wave feature focused over the Indian Ocean. Yeah, like the last participant said, that it goes into the lower amplitude stages as you go forward in time leading into the period, but that's more of a broadening out of the signal. There's some reflection of the MJO in phase 1, 2, and really 3 for that time frame. But we'll focus on the Indian Ocean with our forecast as a warmer signal. Also have the negative GLAM in the background. That's a measure of global winds, not necessarily in a La Nina oceanic state just yet, still INSO neutral. But the negative GLAM does suggest that the atmosphere is behaving much like you would see in a La Nina type pattern. So that's something that is also a warmer signal that's having some influence on the forecast. If you're talking from a teleconnection perspective, there's the correlation between the GLAM and the PNA. So you do have that somewhat of that negative PNA in the background. But right now, we're generally looking at the negative GLAM as being just a warm influence like we've seen over the past several years during the summer season. So we do a forecast where we just draw the anomalies on the map. We do the temperature forecast, and then the population-weighted CDD data falls out of that forecast. So we don't necessarily forecast the PWCDDs directly, but they do fall out of the forecast, and just thought I'd mention that as well. One thing that we are keeping note of, forecasts over the past several weeks, there's been plenty of warm signals and noting model biases, and we've been comfortable going on the hotter side of even the ECMWF model. That's changed this time. So ECMWF actually on the hotter side of our forecast for the current 16 to 20 day period. And part of the reasoning for that is that the pattern over the next 15 days, we've seen it roll forward a little bit cooler. Basically this type of pattern where you get the ridge building across a good portion of the U.S. The northern periphery of that ridge is where you're going to see some clusters of thunderstorms that will be tracking along. So your storm track across the northern U.S. So that's the area where we are a little bit more hesitant to go warmer because of the uncertainty with that storm track, knowing that models can have a bias to maybe miss the coverage of these storms as they go through. And because we are seeing that in the nearer term, where the 1 to 5 day period with some storminess in the Midwest has rolled forward cooler than when it's 6 to 10 or even 11, 15 days out. So we think that maybe the Euro is starting to carry a bias in those areas that are a little bit wetter, where the model may be too hot than where we're comfortable going with our forecast. So that's just a little bit of background there. I know there was a question of what could change the forecast, and I agree that you could get a tropical system, could be out of the Atlantic that comes in. We see that within our near-term forecast where the tropics over the eastern U.S. And some onshore flow into coastal New England. That's somewhat influenced by the tropical storm Faye that we had a few days ago. But even out of the Western Pacific, where if you get a typhoon recurve and get some interaction with the Northern Pacific jet stream, that could also have an influence. But as of right now, models aren't showing any significant tropical activity out of the Western Pacific, so I don't believe that it would be something to give consideration to in this particular forecast as far as changing the pattern. I don't think the MJO moves a whole lot either. It's been a standing wave since the start of the summer, and all the models continue to point in that direction, that we continue to have the standing wave over those very warm waters of the Indian Ocean. And but if there is a risk associated with the MJO, is that you would get maybe a little bit more of an eastward mode. So instead of Indian Ocean, maybe it goes towards Indonesia or even in the Western Pacific. And that's where you could start to see some cooler influences coming into play. So we do put that as a risk within our reports, but we're not going to forecast that just yet. But if the MJO would move, that would probably be the one thing that could cause some issues just based on what we know for the forecast at this stage.
Okay. Any questions for Bradley? I'll just mention that I wish we could get a standing MJO wave in phase 1 and 2 in middle of winter, but guess beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So any questions?
I had a question for
Given the high correlation between MJO phase and U.S. reopening, I think we have a chance this winter.
We'll see. All right. Somebody couldn't hear who it was, but
Can you guys hear me?
yeah, you're a little low, but I can hear you.
Is this better?
Yeah.
All right, this is Sean. I had a question for you, Bradley. When I was looking at the sea surface temperature anomalies, it had the water around Florida pretty high. So I had the temperature for Florida to be on the higher side. Is that something that's worth taking into consideration when doing these forecasts, or is it really not that important?
Yes, it is. I mean, you certainly have those warmer waters, so you could have an impact on temperatures too. But those warmer waters can also enhance convective activity in that region too, which could be a cooler influence if Florida ends up being a bit more stormy than normal. So one thing that you can look at is just, correlations associated with, say, like the positive AMO, something like that, to see how that correlates with temperatures this time of year. And you can use that sort of as an influence as well. One thing that I mentioned with our MJO plots when we're looking at analogs, we are taking some consideration of sea surface temperatures within those. We're not just using basic, what has historically happened out of phase 2, for example, but we're saying what has historically happened out of phase 2 when we have these sea surface temperatures the way they are globally. So we're looking at the warm waters. There's a warm correlation in Florida. So that's not a bad way of at least giving some consideration to sea surface temperatures within the longer range forecast.
All right, thank you.
Bradley, this is Dave. What I know this is a little bit beyond just the medium range, but where do you have this summer ranking as of now for like the June, July, August period?
That's a good question. I haven't put the numbers together, but I can do that here over the next couple of minutes. As we continue to chat, I'll see where things are right now.
Cool. I was just curious. Well, and a more to my question, probably, are you, in terms of August, and if you guys haven't looked too closely, that's fine, but at this point, are you seeing August being more like June and July so far, i.e. just generally on the hot side, nationally speaking, or are there some signals here that we could, see a little bit more variability or coolness?
Yeah, we're still on the hotter side for August. Don't really see any good signals out there to go against that. So we still have the same sea surface temperature areas at play with positive AMO. So you're expecting enhanced Bermuda high from that. Indian Ocean, very warm waters. Given where the weekly climate models are right now going into August, would expect continued convective enhancement over that region. Also having some developing La Nina influence coming into play, which is also a warmer signal. So I can actually show you where our August forecast is right now. Let me bring that up. Okay, so this is our 30-60-day report. So see in August, the first map, we have a focus of aboves east and west, and also in Texas, closer to normal in the mid-continent. Based on that largely on sea surface temperature still, just don't have enough confidence once you get towards the middle of August on exactly what's going on with the MJO, some of those subseasonal factors. So as of right now, which this is from last week, we'll do an update tomorrow. This is where the forecast stands. One thing that we are keeping a watch on is the middle of the country and then also the west, if there's going to be some changes to the forecast upcoming. And the reasoning for that is because as we gain a little bit more confidence on the standing wave persisting over the Indian Ocean, it could allow you to have that warmer mid-continent, but maybe not as anomalous a little bit farther west. So maybe this is more of a central to eastern focus of aboves as opposed to a west and east coast focus that's currently within our forecast. So that's what we are looking at right now as far as could there be potential changes upcoming. But for now, because of that uncertainty, at least as of today, not sure what the move is for tomorrow's update just yet. But for now, those are the things that we're looking at.
Okay, and last question for me, and not to put you on the spot here, but can you, because I can't, but can you think of a recent August or an August just that comes to memory where, you know, the June, July was pretty hot and, you know, not in a situation maybe where, you know, you were transitioning from a strong El Nino or to a strong El Nino or El Nino, where, you know, the August really did a big flip. Can you think of one from recent memory where June, July was pretty hot and then August kind of really cooled down significantly?
I think 2017, I believe, was the year. I should bring that up here. I'm going to go Dynacast. 2017. July.
It's pretty warm. Yeah.
So it was, you know, eighth ranked warm period nationally. And then August that year, I believe, went cooler. Yeah, decently.
Oh, wow. Cooler. Do you remember what the driving mechanism was?
Yeah, actually, it was the typhoon out of the West Pacific. So actually, I did the wrong one there. Let's do 2017 typhoon season. Just quick Wikipedia page on it.
Yeah.
There was a typhoon that was in the West Pac for several weeks, from mid-July even into August. That was a very slow mover. It was out there for, you know, a couple of weeks, almost 3 weeks. And so that really had a role in enhancing the ridge over the northern Pacific up into Alaska and led to that cooler downstream response. So the Typhoon Noru was the reasoning for that back in 2017.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Wrong button. Just for what it's worth, from June 20th to August 2nd, it's predicted to be the second warmest on record, only off by one CDD for the record. So it's been quite a warm summer. I don't know if that answers your question, Dave.
Yeah, usually, can you do go to June 1st? Usually we do the start of the calendar. Yeah.
And to answer the question from earlier, just using our forecast June, July, adding in what I just showed you for August, we would be at 1,030 PWCDDs, which would be about tied for third.
Okay.
Hottest summer back to 1950 per that measure.
Since I know we don't have to go to the end, but since we have a couple minutes and we're on this topic about how hot this summer's been and temperatures and all this stuff, and we've talked a lot about teleconnections. Bradley, have you noticed um, a shift, a change in teleconnections or even the MJO as a function in the summertime as a function of this warming climate? Like, do you see more positive PNA? Do you see more MJO in phase one? How are there things either objectively or just experientially that you've witnessed in the last few years that you think may coincide with the changing climate in the summer?
Yeah, actually, we'll go ahead and bring up on Dynacast the past 10 years average 500 millibar pattern. I think that will really help illustrate what things have looked like here of late.
Let's see. Bradley, did you want to share your screen, or is that Michael? There we go.
Okay, so this is the average of the past 10 years in the larger map here for June through August. A couple of things that are notable: the ridge over the northern Pacific into the Gulf of Alaska, and then also over Greenland. We're looking at teleconnections. You're talking some WPO there, PNA, and NAO, kind of being some of the bigger ones there. I guess AO is, but yeah. It's interesting too. Even if you want to just look at the forecast for the next 2 weeks, there's a lot of similarities there. And let me actually put that stuff again. So there's certainly some similarities within the pattern there.
Right.
So a lot of the same features still out there. So a lot of the drivers from an oceanic perspective, they're still out there. So you're seeing a lot of similarities.
Yep. Thank you.
Wish we could get a similar pattern going in the winter. Okay, we got about 5 minutes left. So if anyone else really wants to mention their forecast, they can. Any more questions for Bradley or anybody, they can do that, or could get released from prison 5 minutes early for good behavior.
Quick question for Dave. Since I missed a large portion of last week's discussion, was there a chance to discuss the potential for the new metric, like the partial the partial continuity pattern persistence?
No. Well, I mean, we talked about persistence, but no, I don't think so. So Philip and I were talking a little bit offline. What Philip's referring to is, this question about persistence, right? And in the past, we developed a persistence metric just based on historical data, like, hey, if the last 5 days or 10 days was above normal, trying to, apply that to the 16 to 20. But Philip had an idea for something that was also made use of the forecast. So, applying some weighting formula to say the 1 to 5, 6, 10, 11 to 15 day, like CFS, EC, or maybe even like Maxar CDD forecast, and using that as a predictor into the 16 to 20, which I think is an interesting idea. And then we also talked about that. Ideally, a step before that would be to actually look a little bit into the performance of such a thing. And thanks to Maxar, we have some of the, like we have a pretty good archive of CFS and EC data. So if there was a student or just participant who, you know, had a little bit of extra time, we thought this could be a really neat research assignment, again, to look at, can we have some sort of weighting formula on the next 15 days and utilize that in a productive way, you know, to inform the 16 to 20 day forecast. That, obviously, there's a little bit more nuance there in terms of the research strategy, but that's the general idea. Does that sound right, Philip?
Yeah, that sounds right.
So I know we're going to run out of time, but if anyone does have some, you know, might be motivated to look into that, you know, please let me know. You know, you can CC Philip too. You know, again, I think it could be a really interesting exercise, and maybe it's something we could partner up and work with, you know, Bradley on, or something like that. That if you have interest into looking at something like that.
All right, so looks like we have about we're basically out of time. So I'll just end off by saying that that September forecast that you showed, Bradley, I kind of hope that's wrong, because I'm kind of tired of the September being in the mid 90s.
Endless summer.
Yeah, September's the months of late. That's just, we've been referring to it as an extension of summer, because really it has been over the last several years. Even our forecast itself, as hot as it is, which let me see if we wrote down what it was relative to, yeah, 7th highest for PWCDV since 1950. Still 4 of the past 5 Septembers have a higher total than what we're forecasting right now.
Well, I guess I'll take what I can get. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Hope to see you again next week. And everyone have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.